There's a truth about success that nobody tells you. Not because it's some closely guarded secret, but because it's too uncomfortable for most people to accept. That truth is this: maybe you never needed support to begin with. Just like plants, some people grow in the light and others grow in the shade. There are those who need the noise, the presence, the constant push from someone else to get moving. And there are those who can only truly find themselves when they're alone, with no one around telling them it's all going to work out. If you're the second type, this video is for you. Success is sold as a collective achievement. With a network, with support, with someone who opens the door before you even get there. But that story has a massive hole in it. It doesn't explain what to do when you look around and see no one. When your family thinks you're dreaming too big. When your friends change the subject. When the silence around you feels like the universe answering back, telling you you're on the wrong path. Anyone who's never felt this is probably not being honest with themselves. And it was exactly this state of mind that a man named Alan Watts dedicated much of his life to addressing. Not to offer cheap comfort, but to show that maybe the problem lies somewhere you haven't looked yet, and that the solution, as a result, does too. There's a feeling that a lot of people carry around without being able to name it properly. You wake up one day with enormous clarity about what you want to do. The idea is right there, alive, taking shape in your mind. But then you pick up your phone, because everyone does, and you see someone being applauded for something similar to what you could also be doing. Without realizing it, the energy drains away. You close the app, open another one, scroll mindlessly for half an hour for no real reason. And by the time the clarity you had that morning is gone, you blame the distraction. But the distraction wasn't the problem. The problem had a different name. You freeze. And time passes. And nothing changes. You were waiting. Not for a specific event. Not for some news. But for a permission that was never formally asked of anyone, and yet you can't act without it. Waiting for someone to notice what you're capable of. For someone to signal that it's time. For the fear to give you a break before you make your move. Alan Watts observed this pattern with a precision that made people uncomfortable. He described how from an early age we're shaped by patterns that repeat everywhere. School teaches you that you need grades to move forward. Family teaches you that you need approval to be loved. Work teaches you that you need a title to have a voice. These patterns are so consistent, so present in every stage of life, that a person reaches adulthood convinced of one thing: they cannot move without someone's permission. If you've ever felt this, you're not alone. This is probably the most common experience among those who think differently and feel more deeply than their surroundings can keep up with. Watts made a point of separating two things we tend to mix up. Needing connection is human and legitimate. No human being thrives in complete isolation. Yes, and that's not weakness. The problem shows up when that need becomes a block. When "it would be nice to have someone by my side" turns into "I can't take a single step without it." This shift happens so silently that most people don't even know when they cross that line. But the effects show up in real life. Years spent waiting for an opening that never comes. Ideas kept to yourself because no one's validated them yet. A life lived well below its potential, not from lack of ability, but from too much waiting. Waiting costs you dearly, and it's not just time. It's the version of you that gets buried a little more with each day you stand still. It's the confidence that slowly drains like water from a faucet no one turns off. It's the distance that grows between who you are now and who you could have become. Every day you stand still isn't neutral. It's a day where you chose, without realizing it, to believe that you're still not enough just as you are. There are days when you go to bed with that awful feeling that you didn't do anything. Not because you were resting, which would be fair, but because you got stuck in a cycle of almost starting, almost acting, almost taking the step, You opened the document and closed it. You thought about sending the message and didn't. You had the idea in your head all day and went to sleep with it still untouched. This cycle is at the center of everything Watts wrote. It's life being postponed in the name of conditions that may never align the way you're hoping. And the worst part isn't the time lost. It's that you know. You know you're waiting. You know the perfect conditions don't exist. You know the timing will never be ideal. And even knowing all this, you wait. Because there's something inside you that still hasn't been understood, and that something is what this entire video is going to talk about. This might bother you a little. And that's fine, because that's exactly where things get interesting. Before we continue, hold on to this. There's a piece of the puzzle that Watts saw that most people go their whole lives without seeing. We'll get to it. But first, you need to understand where the problem really starts. To understand what Watts proposed as a way out, you first need to dismantle the definition of success that was placed inside you without your consent. Because if you're chasing success the way most people define it, you're running toward a finish line that other people drew for other purposes, like in a time that isn't yours. In The Wisdom of Insecurity, a book Watts published in 1951, he develops something that sounds simple but hits deep. Modern human suffering doesn't come from a lack of achievement. It comes from the way we relate to time. The human mind has grown accustomed to living in two places that don't really exist. In the past, ruminating on what was lost or done wrong. In the future, imagining what still needs to be achieved before you can finally rest. And the present, the only place where life actually happens, ends up being crossed like a hallway you never stop to live in. Think about a person who spends the whole day worried about a meeting they have tomorrow, or rehashing something someone said last week. They're physically present at work, at home, at the dinner table, but their mind is in another time. Watts said that most of us live this way most of our lives, and that's exactly why, even when achievements come, they don't bring the promised rest. Because the mind has already moved ahead, already found the next thing that's missing, already created the next condition that needs to be met before you can feel good about what you have. Success, in the view Watts brought from Zen thought to the Western world, is not a destination. It's a quality of presence. It's the difference between doing something because you're genuinely here, engaged, alive in what you're creating, and doing something just to arrive at a place that promises finally, a rest that never comes. This is completely different from what your family taught, from what school measured with grades, from what the market offers as a promise in exchange for more hours. The version of success that circulates out there is always in the future. You haven't arrived yet, but if you work harder, if you have the right people by your side, if conditions improve, maybe one day you will. And in the meantime, life goes by, without asking permission, without waiting for you to be ready. I completely understand when you look at this and feel a mix of anger and exhaustion. It's draining to chase something that's always moving. Watts wasn't asking you to give up on your ambitions. He was saying that the way you pursue those ambitions, through constant comparison and the need for validation, might be the root of the problem, not the solution. You can want to build something big, but if you can only take the next step when someone's applauding, you're not building your life. You're putting on a performance for an audience that's barely paying attention. And here we arrive at something that's going to stay with you. Hold on to this idea because we're going to come back to it later. The loneliness you feel when you don't have support isn't random. It has a logic, and understanding that logic completely changes what you do with it. When it feels like no one around you understands what you're trying to build, the automatic response is to interpret this as an environmental problem. Wrong people, wrong place, wrong time. And maybe part of that is true. But Watts, who deeply studied Zen thought and Taoist philosophy, had a different take. The intensity of the feeling of loneliness reveals how much you still depend on external validation to feel real. Why does the absence of approval hurt so much? Not because approval is necessary for your physical survival, but because at some point in your life, maybe still in childhood, you learned that existing without being recognized is almost like not existing. That the value of an achievement depends on how many people saw it. That you're only real when someone is watching. Think about a time when you did something you were proud of but didn't tell anyone. How did that sit with you? With the same weight as when you shared it with someone and got a good response? For most people, no. And this isn't weakness. It's the result of years of patterns you learned without realizing you were learning them. You learned to see yourself through others' eyes because at some point that was necessary to navigate the world around you. In a home where love depended on performance. Within a school where the teacher's attention was a scarce resource that had to be earned. In an environment where being different meant being a problem. That learning served a purpose when you were smaller. The problem is, it didn't disappear when you grew up. It keeps running inside you, creating an influence on your decisions that no longer serves the life you want to build. Loneliness on the path isn't proof that you're wrong. It's the sign that you're crossing a threshold, the space between who you were and who you're becoming. That crossing hurts. It's completely valid to feel that. But hurting isn't a sign to stop. But there's something that goes beyond this. Something that Watts and Jung, through the different paths each one chose, arrived at the same conclusion about. And that conclusion changes everything. In the book, On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are, published in 1966, Watts develops an idea that seems strange at first glance, but makes a lot of sense when you stop to think about it calmly. He said that Western culture teaches from an early age that you are an entity separate from the rest of the world. You in here, the world out there. As if life were a field where you have to conquer space in a territory that doesn't belong to you by default. Imagine a child who learns from a young age that love isn't given freely. It's earned. That attention is a limited resource that has to be deserved. That child will grow up with a constant feeling that they still haven't done enough. And when support doesn't come, it only confirms what they already believe about themselves. Watts said that this view is a mental construct confused with reality. A way of understanding the world that has practical utility, but when taken to the extreme, creates a human being who feels fundamentally displaced. Small. Alone. Constantly needing to prove they deserve to be here. But what if this separation isn't reality, but a construct? What if the feeling of abandonment isn't an accurate description of what's happening, but a byproduct of the patterns you learned about yourself and about the world? I'm not saying this to minimize what you feel. The pain is real. I'm saying this because Watts believed that understanding where this feeling comes from is the first step to stop being governed by it. And before we continue, I need to tell you something that's going to change how you see what comes next. There's a resistance that doesn't come from the world. That doesn't come from the people around you. That doesn't come from lack of opportunity or a difficult environment. It comes from within. And until you look at it, you'll keep feeling like the obstacle is always on the outside. There's a pattern that shows up in the life of almost everyone who walks without support. You spend the week building something. You don't tell anyone because you know they won't understand, or because you're afraid of what they'll say, or simply because it doesn't seem ready to be shown yet. Then, in a moment of exhaustion, you open your phone and see someone doing something similar to what you're trying to do, being celebrated, getting recognition, and something tightens inside. It's not pure envy. It's a more complicated mix than that. Part admiration, a part questioning, and a question you don't say out loud but think, why them and not me? What do they have that I don't? What am I doing wrong? Watts talked about this in a way that made listeners uncomfortable. He said that most people perform for an imaginary audience. They make decisions based on how things will look, even when those people aren't even paying attention. They avoid risks that no one else knows about so they don't fail in front of witnesses who only exist inside their heads. This imaginary audience is built over years. They're the faces of parents, teachers, classmates who laughed at the wrong moment, people who showed disappointment. They remain in there with a consistency the real world rarely maintains. You might have moved to a different city, built a different life, cut off old relationships, and still those faces are in there, silently commenting on every move you consider making. This is where the work of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung enters in a way that complements Watts with great precision. Jung spent decades studying what happens to everything we repress, hide, and deny within ourselves. He called it the shadow, the part of our personality that was pushed down because it didn't fit the image we built of ourselves. And here's something few people realize. The shadow isn't made only of bad things you want to hide. It also carries extraordinary fragments of your personality that were repressed because the environment around you didn't know what to do with them. Who hasn't felt that a part of themselves, a part that was burning with desire, originality, purpose, was slowly dying? Not all at once, but gradually, as the environment signaled that this part was too much, too strange, too different to be accepted. This isn't weakness. It's the result of years of adapting to a context that wasn't made to receive who you really are. Jung believed that before blaming the world for not supporting you, it's worth looking at what inside you resists your own growth. Because often the greatest resistance isn't out there. It's in a part of you that was conditioned to believe that standing out is risky, that growing can cost you, that being truly seen is dangerous. Watts argued in The Wisdom of Insecurity that all suffering that doesn't have an immediate physical cause comes from a single place: living outside the present. Either you're ruminating on something that happened, the criticism someone made, the support that didn't come, the rejection that still hurts when you remember it. Or you're living in an imagined future where finally, when everything aligns, you'll be able to really start. And the present keeps being crossed without being inhabited. Think about what it's like to spend an entire day worried about a problem that might happen tomorrow. You're physically here, but mentally somewhere else. Nothing you do that day has the weight it could have, because you're not really in that moment. Watts said that most people live this way most of the time. And that's exactly why real action never arrives. Because action can only happen now. And the mind is always somewhere else. The only place where anything can be built is the present. Not the result you want to see 5 years from now. Not the version of you that will exist when conditions are better. The move you can make today, with what you have today, in the space where you are today. When you stop counting what's missing and start using what already exists, something shifts. Not in an explosive way, not with that motivational energy that disappears after 2 days, but with the quiet solidity of someone who understood that the work happens here, not in some idealized future. There's a kind of courage that no one teaches and that rarely shows up in any success story you'll ever hear. It's not the loud courage of movies. It's not the courage that becomes a motivational post with a sunset background. It's the courage to keep going on a day when nothing worked, without a witness, without applause, without anyone knowing you kept going. It's the courage to spend another day building something that still has no visible shape. That still can't be shown. That still doesn't fully exist. It's doing that without the guarantee that it will work, without knowing if anyone will ever recognize this effort. Watts said that whoever waits for total security before acting never acts. Uncertainty isn't a phase before stability. It's the permanent texture of anything worth building. Think of 2 plants. One grows in a well-tended pot, irrigated with prepared soil. The other grows in a crack in the concrete, seeking the light alone between the asphalt. The second will have much deeper roots, because it had to search for them, because every inch was won without help. Silent courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and continuing anyway. Not because you're stronger than it, but because you understood that waiting for it to pass has a real cost. And you no longer want to pay that cost with the years of your life. Watts said that most people don't live. They rehearse life. They take another course before starting. They wait for conditions to improve before publishing, proposing, committing. Waiting for the right moment, which never comes. Every step taken without applause strengthens something that comfort would never develop. And that's exactly what will sustain everything you're trying to build. I know this can be hard to hear, especially when the weight of the solitary path is real and tangible. But I need to say something that seems to go against what everyone feels when they're in this situation. The lack of support you're experiencing today might be exactly the environment you needed to become who you are. I'm not romanticizing suffering. I'm not saying abandonment is good or that rejection should be celebrated. I'm saying something more specific. The internal resources a person develops when they have nowhere to lean externally are of a different quality than those they would develop under comfortable conditions. When you have nowhere to lean, you're forced to find what exists inside you. And what you find this way, digging into your own interior with no alternative, has a durability that borrowed resources from outside can rarely match. What feels like abandonment today might be creating the conditions for something that excessive support rarely allows. The discovery that you can move from within, that there's a source of direction and energy in you that doesn't depend on approval to function, that you're not incomplete just because you're alone. If you take others out of the equation for a moment, just for this experiment, who are you? Not who you are to your family, not who you are to your friends or in your social media version. Who are you when you're not adjusting to anyone's expectations, when there's no audience, when you're truly alone with your thoughts? Jung called this process individuation, the path by which a person becomes a complete individual, separate from the mask they wear day to day. He said we all wear a mask, and that's natural. The problem is when it gets so thick that you yourself no longer know where it ends and where you begin. When the audience leaves, you're faced with the most honest question there is. What remains when the crowd is gone? The answer is the only real foundation. Any construction that depends on an audience to exist is fragile. It can be big, it can impress a lot of people. But in the absence of those who applaud, it collapses. What you build from who you are when no one is watching exists because it's real, not because it's recognized. If you're enjoying this content, check out the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. Watts talked about external noise, the opinions no one asked for, the comparisons you make without meaning to in your phone's feed, as a thick layer that makes it impossible to hear what exists underneath. And what exists underneath isn't empty. It's clarity. A clarity that only becomes audible when the noise dies down. Life today doesn't make that silence easy. The phone on the nightstand before bed. Opening Instagram before even getting out of bed. The constant busyness as proof of productivity. When sometimes it's just a way to avoid being with yourself, to avoid hearing the questions you still don't know how to answer. All of this creates a noise so normalized that we don't even notice it exists anymore. When the opinions around you stop guiding you, silence stops being a threat and starts being a tool. It's the space where real direction appears, not the direction chosen to impress someone, the one that makes sense when you're honest about what truly matters to you. Knowing what comes from within and what comes from outside. Knowing when a criticism points to something real and when it just repeats an expectation that was never yours. This discernment doesn't come from a course or a technique. It comes from staying with yourself long enough to learn how to listen to yourself. At some point on the path, you're going to look to the side and see someone being celebrated. Someone who seems to have more clarity, more recognition, more people believing in them. And you're going to feel something that mixes admiration with a pain you'd rather not name. That moment is a silent trap. A mind accustomed to comparison doesn't see trajectories. It sees positions. It doesn't see the path traveled. It sees where the person arrived. And when you compare where you are now with where another person is, without considering the different conditions, the different starting point, the different context, the result is always distorted against you. Watts warned that Western social dynamics train us from an early age to measure our own worth in relation to others. It's a comparison that never reaches zero, because there will always be someone in another position, with different visibility, with different recognition. And a comparison that never ends is a source that never stops generating insufficiency. Trajectories without structure tend to be slower. Paths built without a support network tend to have more detours and more moments of doubt alone, in the dark, with no one to confirm if you're going in the right direction. But there's something in this type of trajectory that more assisted paths rarely develop, a depth that comes from not having been able to delegate. When you have nowhere to lean, you're forced to find what exists inside you. And what you find this way has a durability that external resources rarely match. And now we arrive at the point that ties everything together. What Watts and Jung, each through their own path, Mas were trying to say their entire lives. The transformations that most change a life rarely happen in public. They happen at 3 in the morning when you're revising something for the 10th time, and suddenly something clicks in a way it hadn't before. They happen in a moment of silence where an idea appears so clear that you need to write it down before you lose it. They happen in the space between who you were and who you're becoming, a space that most people cross without realizing the weight of what just changed. Watts, influenced by Taoism, talked about a way of acting that he called Wu Wei. It's not inaction, it's not passivity, it's not giving up. It's acting without forced effort, without the need for display. It's doing things from who you genuinely are, instead of doing them to prove something to someone or to an audience that might not even really exist. Success that no one sees isn't a second-class success. It happens before the audience arrives. It has value before being evaluated. It exists because it was built for a reason that doesn't depend on a witness. The internal victories you devalued because no one was watching are the foundation of what you're building now. The day you chose to keep going when you could have quit and no one would have known. The decision made according to what you believe, even when giving in would have been much easier and more comfortable. Those moments aren't appendices to your story. They are the story. How do you succeed in life without anyone's support? The answer Watts built throughout his entire life, and that Jung would arrive at through psychology, is this. You don't succeed despite the lack of support. You succeed through it. Not because suffering is necessary, not because isolation is a virtue you should seek, but because the absence of external support, when traversed with awareness and without giving up, is one of the most powerful environments for developing the only kind of strength that doesn't need external conditions to exist. You were waiting for someone to believe in you first so you could begin. And what this entire video has been trying to show is that this waiting isn't prudence. It's the trap. The permission you're waiting for won't come from outside because it doesn't exist there. It exists here, in your decision to act before you're completely ready, before you're certain, before you have the network you wish you had. You weren't being abandoned. You were being prepared for something that can only be built from the inside out. I know this can be hard to accept when the loneliness is real, when the exhaustion is real, when the feeling of doing everything alone truly weighs on your body and mind. I'm not saying it's easy or that it should be. I'm saying that the weight you carry has a function you might not be able to fully see from where you are. The people who inspire the most, who have the most solidity, who move through the world with the most consistency, almost always have at some point in their trajectory a period when they walked without a net, without recognition, without anyone to confirm they were on the right path. Not as an irrelevant biographical detail, as a formative condition, as the ground that created roots that no amount of external support would have produced in the same way. You're not behind. You're on different terrain, building with different materials, developing roots that reach a depth that more assisted paths rarely achieve. And it starts now, with what you have, in the place where you are. Not on Monday, not when conditions improve, not when someone finally believes in you. Now, because the person you're waiting to become already exists inside you. They're just waiting for you to stop asking permission to show up. Every day you act without applause, every decision you make aligned with what you believe, every moment you choose to keep going, even when no one sees, you're building something the external world could never give you. You're building the only thing that can't be taken from you when recognition doesn't come. The certainty that you're real regardless of witness. This is what Watts called freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you are, without needing approval for that to be true. If this video reached a place that will still take some time to process, that's a good sign. The ideas that really change something are rarely comfortable right away. They ask for time. They ask that you sit with them for a while before moving on. Subscribe to the channel to continue this conversation. Every video here is made for those who walk without a map and without applause, for those who think differently and feel more deeply than their surroundings can keep up with. Leave a like if something here made sense to you. And if you want to go deeper into these discussions, the Membership Club is the space where we dive deeper into all of this in a more direct and ongoing way. The work continues, and it continues now.